Okay, so let's talk about the French Revolution, but forget the dry dates and facts you might have learned in school. We're going to step inside Thomas Carlyle's vision of it, which is way more visceral, almost hallucinatory. To him, it was the story of a society so deeply corrupt that it was basically doomed to collapse in this massive moral thunderstorm.
See, for Carlyle, this wasn't just a political shift. It was something bigger, almost like divine justice crashing down on a world that had lost its way. It's a really dramatic, really brutal way to look at it, but honestly, it helps make sense of the absolute chaos of the time.
So get ready. We're going to do more than just learn about it. We're going to try and feel it. We're going to get hurled into screaming crowds, overhear whispered conspiracies, and witness the terrifying, cold logic of the guillotine. This is our journey into what it really felt like to live through that upheaval.
To understand why everything exploded, you first have to understand the decay. You have to see the rot. France, before the revolution, was just spiritually and structurally bankrupt. It was like a hollowed-out tree, just waiting for a single spark to set it ablaze.
I mean, this slide says it all, doesn't it? It perfectly captures the monarchy's complete and total fall from grace. In 1744, the king, Louis XV, gets sick, and the entire nation is weeping and praying for him. He's the beloved. Fast forward just 30 years, he dies, and the nation shrugs. They're literally out in the streets jeering his coffin. That's a colossal shift in how people feel.
So why the huge change? Well, here are the symptoms. You've got a royal court that's basically run by the king's mistress, a nobility that used to be warriors but are now just ornamental, all silken parties, a church that's lost its authority, and the big one, the one that really matters, widespread, crushing hunger. The whole system was festering from the inside out.
And who inherits this absolute mess? A couple of teenagers. When Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette hear the old king is dead, they literally fall to their knees and cry out, "We are too young to reign." And you know what? They were 100% right. They were inheriting a crisis they had no idea, none, how to handle.
So you've got this rotting old world, you have these weak, unprepared leaders at the helm, and all of that anger, all of that desperation that's been simmering for decades, well, it's about to find its voice. This is where the people find their fury, and the revolution truly, truly ignites.
And wow, look how fast it all happens in 1789. The government calls this big meeting the Estates General for the first time in 175 years. But the common people realize the game is rigged against them, so they just walk out. They declare themselves the new government, the National Assembly, take a famous oath on a tennis court, and just a few weeks later, bam, they storm the Bastille. Power is shifting, and it is shifting violently.
In this number right here, this is so crucial. This tells you it wasn't just a protest. This was an armed uprising. On the exact same day they stormed the Bastille, the people of Paris seized 28,000 muskets. All of a sudden, the revolution wasn't just an idea anymore. It was an army. You can just feel the total disconnect between the old world and the new in this one little exchange. The king hears about the Bastille and dismisses it as a revolt. But his aide, he gets it. He says, "Sire, it is not a revolt, it is a revolution." He understood this wasn't some riot you could just put down. The old rules were gone. The world had changed.
So the Bastille has fallen, which is a huge victory. But the king is still hiding out at his palace in Versailles, miles away from the hungry heart of Paris. The revolution feels stuck. It's at a stalemate. So who's going to be the one to break it?
The answer? The women of Paris. You have to put yourself in their shoes. Their cupboards are empty, their children are starving, they're watching the politicians dither and the men hesitate, and they just decide, enough. If the men won't do it, we will.
And what they do next is just extraordinary. It starts with a single young woman beating a drum. That's the spark. It grows into this living deluge, 10,000 women strong, marching all the way to Versailles. They storm the palace, kill guards, and they physically drag the king and queen back to Paris. This single act completely changed the game.
But this is where our story takes a really dark turn. All that idealism from the early days, it starts to curdle. It sours into paranoia, and the revolution enters its most radical, its most violent, and its most famous phase, the Reign of Terror.
So what was the final nail in the coffin for the monarchy? It was the king's own boneheaded move. He tried to flee France in disguise with his family. When he was captured and dragged back to Paris, he wasn't a king anymore. In the eyes of the people, he was a traitor and a prisoner. Any last hope of a peaceful, constitutional monarchy died right there on that road.
And this leads us straight into the Reign of Terror. You have to understand, this was basically state-sanctioned paranoia. The new government, the Committee of Public Safety, started rounding up so-called enemies of the revolution. And that label could mean almost anything. They were executed by the thousands, all in the name of creating a new, virtuous republic.
And at the very center of it all was this man, Maximilien Robespierre. This quote is absolutely chilling because it shows you the twisted logic behind the whole thing. For him, the guillotine wasn't murder. It was just a tool for purifying the nation. It was justice, only sped up.
And the sheer scale of that justice is just staggering. At its absolute peak, in Paris alone, they sent over 1,300 people to the guillotine in just a few weeks. The revolution wasn't just killing its enemies anymore, it was truly devouring its own children.
Well, inevitably, the paranoia turned on its creator. Robespierre's own colleagues, now terrified that they would be the next ones on his list, finally found the courage to stand up to him. In the very hall where he had held absolute power, the cry went up, "Down with the tyrant!"
His end was just as swift and brutal as the terror he'd unleashed. He actually tried to commit suicide, but only managed to shatter his jaw. So they carried him, wounded and silent, to the exact same guillotine that had killed so many of his victims. He let out one scream, and then he was gone. And just like that, the bloodiest phase of the revolution was over.
So, what happens after the terror burns itself out? What's left? Well, you have a nation that is just exhausted, completely drained, and it starts to turn away from the idea of popular revolt and looks for a different kind of order, which sets the stage for the final act. The whiplash must have been incredible. Society went from the super strict, moralizing virtue of Robespierre's world to this fever of luxury. We're talking lavish parties, wild fashion, even morbid parties called victim balls. But underneath all that glitz, for the poor people on the streets, nothing had changed. They were still starving.
And when the people tried to rise up one last time, they weren't met by politicians. They were met with cannons. A young, ambitious army officer, you may have heard of him, Napoleon Bonaparte, was ordered to disperse a crowd, and he did it by firing artillery right into them. That whiff of grape shot, as it was called, signaled the end. The army, not the people, now held all the power.
Which really brings us to our final nagging question. The story, as Carlyle tells it, is of a revolution born from righteous anger that just spiraled into self-destruction. And in the vacuum that was left behind, a man like Napoleon was almost guaranteed to rise. So it leaves us wondering, when a movement that's meant to bring liberty consumes itself in blood, does that path always, inevitably, lead to a new master?